Tonight you will step softly into a rain-darkened Canadian home of the 1950s and feel how one ordinary kitchen table can hold warmth, duty, pride, loneliness, and the quiet comfort of being needed. Settle in now if you like. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the room around you grow a little softer. If there is a lamp nearby, perhaps keep only that one on. If these quiet journeys into ordinary lives are something you truly enjoy, you are always welcome to subscribe and return another night. And if you feel like it, you can leave a note about where you are listening from, because there is something strangely comforting in imagining all of us in our different rooms and different weather, meeting for a little while in the same gentle past. Tonight you are not entering a palace, or a battlefield, or a famous moment in a history book. You are stepping into something smaller, and for that reason perhaps more intimate. A rainy evening in a Canadian home in the 1950s, a modest house on a quiet street, maybe southern Ontario, where the rain can settle in with a patient steadiness and darken the whole block before supper dishes are dry. Maybe a small prairie town, where the rain comes colder and flatter, brushing the windows with a sound that makes the indoors feel briefly blessed. The exact province matters less than the feeling. Outside, the street shines black under the porch light. A bicycle is left on its side near a hedge. The front step smells of wet wood. The hem of someone's coat is still damp. And in the kitchen, under a warm bulb with a pull chain, the table waits. That table is where you will stay, in one way or another, all through this night. Not every piece of furniture earns that kind of attention. A sofa may look softer, a bed may promise more rest, but the kitchen table is different. The kitchen table is where the evening gathers after the house has already spent itself once on supper. It is where the work reappears in quieter forms. It is where the good dishes are set down, then washed, where bread is sliced, croutons folded, hems checked, children corrected, letters opened, tea poured, and hands finally rested flat on a surface that still remembers the heat of plates and elbows. You can see it now, modest, solid, maybe painted wood, maybe varnished maple, a little worn at the edges where years of sleeves and plates have rubbed the finish dull. One chair that creaks more than the others. A waxed or oilcloth surface, if the household is practical, which it is. Nothing theatrical, nothing arranged for admiration. And yet, on a rainy night, it becomes the emotional center of the house, with a force almost no one stops to name. You wake this world into being by entering it quietly. The rain has already been falling for an hour, perhaps two. Not a summer storm with shouting thunder and showy light. This is a more domestic rain, a steady, enclosing rain, the sort that blurs the neighbor's porch and makes the eaves tick. The sort that sends everyone indoors early and keeps them there. The sort that changes the sound inside the house. You hear it before you see anything else. Rain on the window over the sink. Rain tapping the metal edge of the storm door. Rain dripping from the end of a gutter. Rain softening the whole street into something half lost and private. And in the kitchen a woman moves through the last bright stretch of the day's obligations. You are that woman now. You stand at the sink with your sleeves just slightly rolled, your hands in dishwater gone cloudy with supper grease. The plates are stacked on one side. The cutlery waits in a chipped mug. The tea towel over your shoulder is already damp. Somewhere deeper in the house, a radio murmurs. A child is being told not to drag something across the floor. A man clears his throat in the living room, where the paper has opened like a screen between the day outside and the comfort he expects to find at home. The furnace breathes. The kettle, not yet on, sits ready on the stove like a promise of the next stage of the evening. And this is where the secret begins. Because rainy nights do not only make a home warmer, they make it feel more complete, more sealed, more necessary. On a fair evening in June or September, doors open, children go in and out, men linger in garages or on porches, neighbors wave across lawns, and the house can feel almost temporary, a station between more interesting things. But on a rainy night, the house closes around you. The windows become borders. The lamplight matters more. Every dry chair and folded towel and hot pot becomes part of a small, successful resistance against the weather. The house is no longer background. It becomes the whole world for a few hours, and that changes what is felt inside it. It changes the value of your labor too. The wiping of the table is no longer just wiping. It is restoring order against dampness. The setting out of dry socks near the register is not merely tidying, it is protection. The kettle is not just for tea, it is warmth made visible. The supper table is not just where the family ate, it is where the family proved, in its plain way, that they belong somewhere sheltered. You do not say any of this aloud, of course. In homes like this, much of what matters most is almost never spoken in grand language. You would never stand at the counter and announce that the rain has transformed the emotional architecture of domestic life. You would only say perhaps that it is nasty out, or that the children must keep their rubbers by the mat, or that everyone is in tonight, so there is no point leaving the good lamp off in the kitchen if people keep coming through. And yet beneath those small practical sentences lives a whole weather system of feeling. That is what makes an ordinary evening worth entering slowly. Because on the surface it is only rain, only dishes, only a kitchen table in a modest Canadian house sometime in the middle of the last century. But the longer you remain there, the more you begin to feel what the room is holding. The caution about money, the effort not to waste heat, the pride in keeping things nice, the weariness in the feet, the relief of hearing everyone accounted for indoors, the low private wish, never quite confessed, that the rain might go on just long enough to excuse the world from asking anything more of you tonight. So come a little closer to the table now. The bulb above it is warm and slightly yellow. The window beside it is dark enough to turn into a mirror if you look at it too long. A child's school paper sits at one corner, curled from damp fingers. There is a salt shaker, a folded section of the Eaton's catalogue, and a faint ring left by a teacup. Someone has nicked the edge with a knife years earlier. Your hand knows every mark without looking. Rain presses softly at the glass. The chair legs rest on linoleum that gives a dull sound underfoot. Supper is over, but the evening is not. In some ways it is only beginning. And if you stay here long enough, you will understand why rainy nights felt so different then. Why the house seemed warmer, why the table seemed to gather more than plates. Why ordinary women carrying ordinary burdens could feel both hemmed in and held at the same time. The rain is still coming down. The kettle is about to go on, and the kitchen table, faithful and plain, is waiting to tell you everything. You do not leave the kitchen right away after supper, because a 1950s kitchen does not empty itself simply because the meal is over. The family may drift from the table, but you do not drift with them. You remain inside the room's second life, the quieter one, where the dishes, crumbs, folded napkins, and cooling pans still ask to be dealt with in a sequence so familiar it lives almost below thought. Rain makes that sequence feel even more enclosed. The whole evening narrows down to surfaces, sounds, and small movements. First there are the plates. They sit in a little stack near the sink, faintly greasy, carrying the smell of gravy, boiled vegetables, maybe meatloaf or sausages, perhaps a practical stew served with bread thick enough to be filling. Nothing dramatic, something sensible, something that stretches. The table still holds the marks of the meal. Pepper shaken too generously by one child, a smear of jam somebody did not notice at noon, and which now catches the light, a breadcrumb softened by a damp fingertip. You gather these remains with the same hand that has done it yesterday and the day before, and probably thousands of times already. Though nobody would think to count, the kitchen table takes the full weight of family life in public, and then silently presents its evidence after everyone rises. The tea towels hang near the stove. One is for dishes, one for hands, though by now the distinction has blurred. The cloth is warm in spots, cool in others, and faintly smells of soap and flour. You wipe the tabletop in a broad, practiced arc. The sound is one of the softest in the house. On a dry evening, there would be other noises competing with it. A screen door slapping, boys running through the yard, someone calling from outside, a lawnmower refusing to stop. But rain cancels most of that. Rain edits the world. So the wiping of the table becomes audible. The shifting of cutlery becomes audible. The cup placed down beside the sink becomes audible. Your own breathing, if you pause long enough, becomes part of the room. The kitchen itself is not large. Most likely it is efficient rather than spacious. A room built for use, not display, though naturally, it will be expected to look respectable if anyone sees it. The linoleum floor is patterned in a way meant to hide wear, but never entirely succeeding. The cupboards are painted, perhaps cream, pale green, or a tired white that has warmed over time from heat and cooking and cigarette smoke. There may be glass knobs, perhaps chipped. The stove has a steady heaviness to it, and beside it sits a small counter where bread is cut and lists are written, and things are set down only to be moved again. A calendar hangs somewhere visible, advertising a local insurance office, feed supplier, funeral home, or dairy. The date is marked, but lightly. Days are less about big appointments than about repetition and season. And the season matters. Rain in Canada is never only rain. It carries temperature with it. It carries what the family has worn in from outside. It carries how the house must answer back. In spring, the rain might smell of thawed earth and old leaves, with boots leaving brown half-moons by the door. In autumn, it might carry a sharper chill and a faint leaf rot from the eaves and roadside ditches. Even summer rain, if it goes on long enough into evening, can cool the rooms enough that someone reaches for a cardigan without admitting they are cold. You feel weather through the house long after the front door closes. It lingers in coat sleeves, in the damp edge of a school satchel, in the wool smell rising from mittens or from the cuffs of a husband's jacket hung near the back entry. Rainy nights make the home feel warmer, partly because everything brought in from outside feels slightly chilled and damp by contrast. Dryness becomes a kind of luxury. Warmth becomes visible. You move to the back door and look at the entry mat. There they are, rubbers, school shoes set crooked. Perhaps a pair of men's work boots with wet grit drying along the edges. An umbrella leans in the corner, if the family owns one sturdy enough to bother with. Coats hang from hooks, rain darkening the shoulders. One sleeve still drips. The hallway, or mudroom, if the house is fortunate enough to have one, carries that unmistakable smell of wet wool and outdoor air trapped indoors. It is not a bad smell. It is simply the smell of family having returned, of everyone being in. That is part of the comfort too. Rainy nights gather people. A clear evening allows escape. Someone can say they are going out for a walk, or to the garage, or to visit a neighbor, or just to stand a little longer on the porch. Rain makes most people surrender to the interior. The home fills up not only with bodies, but with moods. Children grow louder from confinement, then suddenly softer from coziness. Men who might otherwise linger elsewhere appear in the living room earlier than expected, rustling newspapers or asking whether there is tea on. The housewife, though perhaps never using that word of herself with any sentiment, feels the traffic of the whole evening bend toward her workspace. You return to the sink. The dishwater is warmer now because your hands have adjusted, or perhaps colder because time has passed and you did not notice. You rinse and stack, rinse and stack, rinse and stack. You know exactly how many plates belong to the everyday set, and which bowl has a hairline crack that must not be pressed too hard with a towel. There is skill in this, though no one in the room would call it that. Skill in order, in economy of motion, in knowing what can air dry and what must be polished quickly if it is not to spot. A person can spend years becoming expert in these tiny efficiencies and still have them described as simply helping around the house or just doing what needs doing. At the table, a child has left homework open. Pencil marks, maybe geography, maybe arithmetic. The page has a waviness from being too near a wet sleeve or from having been carried home under a coat in the rain. You glance at it while drying a plate. Not to study, only to confirm that it exists, that it has not disappeared into some corner to become tomorrow morning's panic. This is what rainy nights often do. They bring forward tomorrow's worries in their smallest forms. Homework, damp shoes that must be dry by morning, a lunch pail needing to be found, a cuff to be resewn, A note from school to be signed. The table receives these things the way a shoreline receives driftwood, one piece at a time. The kettle goes on at last. There is immense comfort in that sound before the whistle, before the steam, before the cup is poured, just the kettle set on the element or burner, just the expectation of heat. Perhaps you make tea. Perhaps coffee is still left from earlier, kept warm too long and now slightly bitter. Either way, the hot drink belongs to the rainy evening as naturally as the dishwater and the dark windows. Warmth must be renewed in stages. The family suppers, then drinks. The stove cooks, then simmers. The table serves, then receives. If you sit, it is only for a moment at first. One hand presses against the edge of the table as you lower yourself into the chair with the least wobble. The chair is cool under you, though not for long. The room smells of soap, steam, damp cloth, and supper. Rain blurs the window until the outside world looks not black exactly, but softened, as if the whole neighborhood has been wrapped in wet paper. Somewhere in the living room a laugh rises, then falls. Somewhere upstairs, a drawer opens. This is the hour when the house is still active but no longer public. The day has turned inward. And that is why the kitchen table matters so much on nights like this. At supper, it belongs to everyone. After supper, it begins to belong to the truth that the chairs must be pushed in and then pulled out again. That crumbs do not disappear because children have gone to another room. That food must be saved properly. That tomorrow begins in these little unnoticed arrangements. That a woman can be surrounded by family and still be the last one truly finished. The table becomes an office, a laundry counter, a sewing station, a school desk, a budgeting surface, a resting place for elbows and thoughts. Rain does not create those uses, but it sharpens them. Because rain keeps the family inside, the table must hold more of life at once. You look down at its surface and see not furniture, but duty made domestic and manageable. There is no ceremony in it. That is part of its power. Nobody praises the kitchen table for being heroic. Nobody writes admiring pieces in magazines about the moral courage of wiping it again at 8:30 while listening for the kettle. Yet this plain table holds the whole private architecture of ordinary Canadian evenings. Rain only makes that architecture glow more clearly. The window fogs a little over the sink. The dish rack shines faintly. Somewhere a child asks a question from another room and waits to be answered immediately, as if your mind has not already divided itself 12 ways tonight. So you stand again. You reach for the tea towel. You straighten the homework page. You move the salt shaker back to the middle. You touch the table once with the flat of your hand, checking whether it is still damp from wiping. Outside, rain keeps falling over the street, over hedges and driveways and dark parked cars. Inside, the kitchen has become the heart of the house, and the table is still holding it together. When the dishes are done, or done enough, the room changes again. Not into rest exactly. More into a quieter kind of work, the sort that can be mistaken for stillness if you are not the one doing it. This is the hour when the family, if they remember you at all, may think you are simply sitting at the table. But sitting at the kitchen table on a rainy evening in a 1950s Canadian home rarely means idleness. It means the next set of obligations has arrived in smaller forms. A sock comes first, perhaps. Not ceremoniously, just a child's school sock, greyed at the heel no matter how often it is washed, with the beginning of a thinning patch near the toe. You notice it while gathering damp clothes from a chair bag, or when turning a pair right side out after laundry has cooled near the register. You bring it to the table because the light is better there, and because the table is flat and reliable, and near everything else you may need. Needle. Thread. Darning egg, if the household has one. Glasses, perhaps, though perhaps you do not yet admit needing them. The rain at the window makes the table lamp or overhead bulb feel brighter, isolating the small circle where your hands move. This is how ordinary evenings fill up, not with one great burden, but with 20 tiny ones that arrive disguised as maintenance. You turn the sock in your hands and see not only the whole, but the future of the whole. If it is not mended now, it will widen. If it widens, the child will complain in the morning, or, worse, say nothing and go to school uncomfortable. And discomfort, in homes like this, is not treated as a neutral thing. It is a sign that something is not being managed properly. Not always anyone's fault, not entirely, but still a sign. The line between thrift and neglect can feel very thin to the woman expected to keep the household respectable. So the sock is mended at the table while the rain goes on. Next to it may sit a small stack of other evening matters. A permission slip, a note from school, a pencil needing sharpening, a grocery list begun on the back of an envelope, 2 receipts from the butcher and the drugstore, the local paper folded to a page with store advertisements, perhaps the Eaton's catalogue or Simpson's, thick and hopeful, half useful and half dangerous, because it offers both necessity and longing in the same paper smell. Rainy nights are good nights for catalogues, not because you are buying lavishly, but because looking itself can be a kind of temporary comfort. You turn pages with hands that still smell faintly of sunlight, soap and onion and dishwater, and for a few minutes the table becomes a place where the family's practical present sits beside its modest wishes. But wishes must be measured. That is another reason the table matters. It is where desire is flattened into arithmetic. A child may need overshoes before the weather turns worse. A husband may need a new work shirt. The curtains in the front room are perhaps getting tired, though not tired enough to justify replacing. There may be Christmas to think about, though it is only October. There is always something ahead. The rainy evening sharpens these calculations because it gathers the household into one visible unit. Everyone home. Everyone needing. Everyone wearing something that frays, eats something that runs out, grows out of shoes, forgets mittens, tears cuffs, drops pencils, or asks without quite asking for the sort of comfort that costs money. And the one sitting at the kitchen table is often the one who knows exactly what things cost. Not in theory. In weight. In sequence. In postponement. You know that tea is cheaper when stretched with careful timing, that yesterday's potatoes can become tomorrow's fried lunch if stored properly, that a roast chicken is not one meal, but several, if handled with imagination and discipline, that flour must be watched, that sugar does not disappear evenly through the month, that fresh fruit is a pleasure with a season and a price attached. You know the difference between buying because it is needed and buying because you are tired and want, just once, not to keep calculating. These are not the grand economic ideas anybody writes on office blackboards. These are the kitchen table economics of ordinary families, managed by women whose work is intimate enough to be taken for granted. The rain helps keep you there. A clear, dry night might tempt to walk to the corner store, or a little air on the porch, or simply that feeling that the world remains open and unspent. Rain closes options. Rain says stay where the light already is. So the table accumulates more of the evening's life. A basket of mending. A half-finished cup of tea leaving a ring on a saucer. Buttons in a tin. A child called back to the room to show how a page should be corrected more neatly. The table becomes not just a surface, but a command post of patience. And still, there is comfort in it, because the table does not demand performance the way some other parts of the house do. The front room or parlour, if the family uses such words, often carries a different pressure. Cushions must sit properly, the carpet must be protected. Certain good things are displayed there in a mood of readiness, as if respectability itself might call at the door. But the kitchen table is allowed to show work in progress. It is allowed to hold the unglamorous middle of life. Rainy nights especially give it permission to look busy, to look lived in, to look useful. A mug can sit there. Thread clippings can gather there. Damp drawings from school can be spread out to dry there. The room is warm enough, practical enough, forgiving enough. Perhaps that is part of why the rain feels so companionable. It gives the household a reason to stop pretending it is more elegant than it is. It lets the family retreat to usefulness. Wet weather draws everyone closer to the most honest room in the house. You can hear them around you even now. A child on the floor in another room, humming or arguing with a toy. The father's chair shifting against a rug. The brief metallic sound of the radio dial being adjusted. Maybe the weather forecast, half heard. Maybe dance music, news read in a serious voice, or an announcer speaking with that clipped steadiness that once made every ordinary sentence sound official. The sounds come toward the kitchen and fade again, but you remain at the table, which acts like the house's true listening post. Your hands slow, thread through needle, pull, knot, turn the fabric. You have done this in better light, in worse moods, with less patience and with more urgency. Tonight the rain makes the pace gentler, even if the list is long. Rain has a way of flattening time without actually reducing the work. That is one of its tricks. It makes the evening feel softer while leaving the duties intact. Perhaps that is why rainy nights feel warmer, but also heavier. The house gathers close. The light looks kind, but the woman at the table still knows how much remains unseen. You glance at the clock. Not late, but later than the family imagines. Children will soon need nudging toward washing up and bed. A husband may ask if there is still pie or toast or one more cup of tea. Someone's lunch must be considered for tomorrow. A shirt may need ironing, yet for this one pocket of time, you remained seated, your forearms on the table, listening to rain move along the gutters and over the darkened street. The table under your arms is cool where the oilcloth is bare, warmer where the cup has rested. There is a tiny snag near one corner, a pale scratch shaped like a comma. These are details known by touch. Years from now, someone may remember this room and not remember a single brand name of stove or wall paint, but they may remember the exact way the table felt under their wrist while rain tapped the window and their mother, or they themselves, sorted the evening into manageable pieces. That is how memory often works. It clings to surfaces that held emotion quietly, and the kitchen table on a rainy 1950s night holds plenty. It holds the discipline of keeping on. It holds the small pride of competence. It holds the private fatigue no one sees, because it looks so much like calm. It holds the family's paper trail, report cards, receipts, catalogues, parish notices, recipes clipped from newspapers, an unpaid bill turned face down for an hour because looking at it once was enough for tonight. It holds the woman who keeps these things from becoming disorder. The rain goes on at the windows, soft but insistent. Your tea cools. The sock is mended. Another small task rises to replace it, and once again the kitchen table receives it without complaint, as if this had always been its purpose. Not merely to host family life when it is cheerful and visible, but to support it after dark, when its real maintenance begins. Rain changes the whole emotional geography of the house. On a clear evening, each room may keep a little independence. The front room belongs to the newspaper and the radio. The children's room belongs to noise, arguments, marbles under beds, paper dolls, half-finished arithmetic. The back entry belongs to muddy shoes and hasty arrivals. The porch belongs to fresh air and short, neighbourly talk. But when rain falls steadily through the evening, all those borders begin to soften, and nearly every path bends back toward the kitchen. You feel it first in the hallway. The coats hung there are heavier than usual, their hems darkened, their sleeves still cool to the touch. A knitted cap, soaked through, is turned upside down near the register, in hope rather than certainty. A pair of rubbers sits open like black little mouths, shining under the dim light by the back door. The mat has taken in more than it can comfortably hold. It smells faintly of wet grit and wool. Even the wallpaper, if there is wallpaper in that part of the house, seems to breathe in the dampness brought indoors by everybody who has crossed the threshold before supper. The children feel rain differently from you, though you are the one who must answer to what it leaves behind. If they are young, rain means trapped energy. It means voices carried into the house from the yard and then not properly lowered once the door shuts. It means socks changed in a hurry and then dropped beside the wrong chair. It means complaints about damp cuffs, about nothing to do, about a brother touching something he ought not to touch. It means somebody drawing at the kitchen table because the weather has made the rest of the house feel too far away, too dark, too quiet, or simply too grown-up. Their elbows spread, their crayons roll, their homework papers come out wrinkled from satchels that have absorbed a little weather. The rain keeps them near the room where somebody competent is always in motion. If they are older, rain may make them dream of leaving the house even more sharply, though tonight it denies them. They stand at the window and look out at the street lamp, turning every drop silver. They say it is miserable out in a tone that means something larger than weather. They are restless for dances, rinks, friends, sidewalks, cars, some future in which their evenings will not be governed by the timetable of supper and drying mittens. Yet even they drift back to the kitchen table at intervals, because it is where the better light is, where toast can appear, where a shirt button can be found and repaired, where someone still remembers if a form needs signing in the morning. And then there is your husband, who may not think of himself as pulled by the weather, though he is. On dry evenings, a man might linger in the garage over something mechanical, or stand in a neighbour's shed doorway discussing a lawn, a carburetor, a game, a roofline, anything that allows talk to remain pleasantly impersonal. He might walk out to the porch with a cigarette. He might decide some small outdoor task has suddenly become urgent. Rain cancels many of these disappearances. It makes the indoors not merely a place to return to, but a place to remain in. And that changes the housewife's evening in ways nobody would describe so plainly. The man is home earlier and home more fully. He folds himself into a chair in the next room, perhaps grateful without saying so. He asks whether the children have washed up. He rustles the paper. He glances toward the kitchen more often. He is under the shelter you maintain, whether or not he frames it that way in his mind. The rain narrows the family inward, and the kitchen becomes the room where that nearness must be managed. You hear the back and forth through the doorway. One child wants a pencil sharpened. Another says the scissors are missing. Someone calls for adhesive tape, for a clean glass, for permission to do something that need not really be asked, except that on rainy nights everyone seems to need reassurance that the household still has a centre, and that centre is not abstract. It has a table. It has a woman moving between stove and sink and chair. It has a kettle, a dishcloth, a drawer full of useful things that never stay properly sorted because life keeps reaching into them. You can feel the rain in the windows. Sometimes it comes in soft diagonal lines down the glass, barely visible unless the porch light catches it. Sometimes it gathers at the sill and ticks in a rhythm that seems almost deliberate. The kitchen window over the sink may fog gently near the edges from the contrast between wet, cool, dark outside and warm, wet work inside. If you wipe the pane with your hand, you leave a clear streak and then immediately regret it, because now the glass bears a print. That small irritation is part of the evening too. Rainy nights make you aware of every surface. Every surface asks to be kept respectable. Every surface records use. That is one reason the kitchen table matters even more when rain is falling. It is the one place where the household's damp little emergencies can be spread out, seen, corrected, and converted into readiness for tomorrow. A school notebook left too near a puddled lunch tin can be opened and dried page by page. A cuff darkened by weather can be turned toward the stove and forgotten for 10 minutes, then remembered just in time. A pair of mittens can be laid flat, thumbs out, near the corner where nobody will rest a cup on them. A note from school can be smoothed and signed. A child's hair can be quickly rebraided while she sits half facing you on a chair, restless but compliant. Rain drives these practical intimacies back into the same pool of light, and the room itself responds. The stove seems to give off more than heat. The overhead lamp grows more golden simply because outside has gone so fully blue-black. The linoleum, usually just a hard-working floor, becomes a kind of quiet stage where every footstep is slightly softened. The cupboards feel more solid. The bread box looks more dependable. Even the chair backs, worn smooth by years of use, seem friendlier to the hand. Rain makes the modest house feel as if it is drawing its own borders more firmly, becoming for a little while sufficient to the whole family. But sufficiency is not the same as ease. Because the closer everyone draws, the more clearly you feel what it costs to keep closeness comfortable. Someone must notice who is still damp, who is cold, who is cross, who needs feeding again, who ought to be sent to bed before tears arrive, who has outgrown a sleeve, who has only one clean gym shirt left, who is tracking dirt from the entry, who has set a wet satchel on a polished chair. Rainy nights gather the family inward, but they gather the labor inward too. The work becomes denser, not broader, more concentrated, less visible. Perhaps without ever saying it aloud, that there is a peculiar loneliness in being the person who benefits last from the coziness everyone else enjoys first. The children feel the comfort immediately. They are in socks or in dry clothes, close to warmth, asking for toast or cocoa or one more story. The husband feels it too. He is under the roof, out of the weather, perhaps with his slippers on, his paper open, supper settling kindly. But you, the woman who creates the evening's warmth, often experience it through tasks before you experience it as rest. Your comfort is delayed by everyone else's needs. Rain intensifies that truth because it makes the home seem especially precious, and anything precious must be maintained. Still, there are moments when the room gives something back. A child leans against your arm at the table for no reason except tiredness. The kettle begins to hum again. The rain on the window steadies into a sound almost like calm breathing. The chair finally receives your weight for more than a minute. Your hands, though dry from dishwater and nicked from work, close around a warm cup. Across the room, socks are drying. At the edge of the table, a school page has flattened. The night outside is wet, but inside the kitchen, everything that matters is slowly being brought back to warmth. That is what rainy evenings do in houses like this. They expose the full machinery of comfort by making everybody need it at once. And at the center of that machinery, again and again, is the kitchen table. Patient beneath homework, teacups, damp wool, and your tired forearms, holding the whole family a little closer than they would otherwise be. By the time the children have been quieted once, and then quieted again, by the time the last plate has dried or at least stopped dripping, your eye begins to turn toward tomorrow. Rainy nights are never only about surviving the weather outside. They are about converting what remains of today into something useful for morning. And in a 1950s Canadian kitchen, that conversion often happens at the table. The supper things are gone, yet supper itself lingers. It lingers in the air as onion and gravy in the sink, as a faint sheen on the dishpan in the bread box, as a few remaining slices in the enamel pot where one serving has been deliberately left rather than accidentally spared. You lift lids and look not as a hungry person looks, but as a manager does. What can be saved? What can be stretched? What is best turned into lunch before anybody asks for something fresher and more costly? Rain makes this inventory feel oddly companionable. The outside world is wet and dark. The inside world is wet and dark. The inside world becomes a study in stored usefulness. At the table you set down a bowl, a plate, a scrap of wax paper, maybe a roll of greaseproof paper, if the household is reasonably supplied, maybe only a clean dish and a sensible covering. The leftovers appear modestly: potatoes, half a cup of peas, sliced meat, a heel of bread that is too dry to offer but too good to throw away. You do not think of this as thrift in a grand ideological sense. It is simply how a decent house is run. Yet thrift has a texture, and on rainy evenings you can feel it clearly in your hands. You scrape, sort, wrap, label in your head if not on paper. The kitchen table becomes a place where the family's future meals take quiet shape. Tomorrow's lunch for a husband going to work in weather that may still be wet. Tomorrow's school sandwiches. Tomorrow's soup improved by what is not quite enough to count as a meal tonight. You know the uses of things at 3 different stages. Crisp bread for supper. Slightly stale bread for toast. Quite stale bread for crumbs, pudding, dressing. Whatever can keep usefulness from becoming waste. This knowledge is not flashy. It is inherited, observed, refined by repetition, and sharpened by necessity. In many homes, there is a little more money than there once was perhaps. The decade carries signs of modest comfort. New appliances in catalogues, better fabrics in the shops. Yet many women still run kitchens with an inner caution that belongs to harder years as much as to their present ones. The fear of waste does not disappear just because the table looks full on a good Sunday. It lives in the way bacon fat is saved in a jar near the stove, in the way foil is smoothed for one more use, in the way a roast is never only a roast, but a beginning. On rainy nights, this caution can feel almost tender. You stand at the icebox or refrigerator, depending on the house and year and budget, and decide what belongs where. The old enamel refrigerator with a reassuringly solid handle, the newer one if the household is fortunate, humming with modern promise. The basement freezer, in some homes, not grand, but immensely valued. Its existence quietly changing how meat is bought and how meals are planned. Whether your kitchen is modestly equipped or comparatively up-to-date, the table remains the true sorting ground. Cold storage may keep food from spoiling, but the table is where judgment happens. And judgment, in a housewife's life, rarely limits itself to food. As you wrap leftovers, you also think of who will complain if the same thing appears too soon, who will eat without fuss, who must be kept hearty, who has taken to being particular in a way you suspect is mostly mood. You remember who likes crusts and who leaves them. You think of school lunches, of what travels well, of what looks respectable when a child opens the wax paper at noon under the eyes of classmates. A sandwich is not just nourishment, it is a small public display of how a household manages. Too plain, and the child may feel ashamed. Too careless, and you feel you have failed. Too extravagant, and the month stretches badly. So again, the table carries more than food. It carries social caution. There may be a canister of flour nearby, its lid slightly flour dusted. A sugar tin. A jar of tea. A bread box with crumbs in the corners. These are not merely kitchen items. They are measures of steadiness. A full flour bin says the week is under control. A little row of labelled jars, if you have them, says the house is kept properly. A tidy bread box says no one is careless. Rain outside makes these inner signs feel more important because the family is enclosed with the evidence of its own management. You sit for a moment to write the grocery list. The pencil is not perfectly sharp. The paper may be the back of an envelope, a page from a small pad, an old receipt turned over. Butter. Tea. Potatoes. Soap flakes. Maybe liver, if it is cheap, and you can think of a way to serve it without complaint. Maybe carrots, onions, tinned tomatoes, evaporated milk, jam if it has run low, cocoa if you think the weather may stay damp and the children will ask for something warm. You write with a hand that has already done half a day's labour and still moves steadily. The list is rarely just a list. It is a negotiation with the week ahead. A forecast, a quiet promise that the house will continue to produce meals on time and with enough comfort to keep everyone moving. Outside, rain slips down the window in tracks. Inside, the kitchen glows over onions, bread, tea, saved fat, and penciled arithmetic. There is no audience for this part. No one leans in the doorway and marvels at the skill with which you convert fragments into continuity. Yet this is one of the deepest forms of domestic intelligence. The ability to make a household feel secure, not only tonight but tomorrow and the day after, using what is already on hand, what is nearly gone, what can be made to do one more time. The table bears witness to that intelligence, even when the family does not. Sometimes a child wanders back in while you're making the list. Not because they need anything urgent, only because rain makes them orbit the kitchen. They stand beside you and ask whether there will be cookies tomorrow, or if it will keep raining, or whether they may have the crust from the bread box if it is toasted with jam. You answer while still writing. The ordinary miracle of these evenings is that care can be delivered in fractions of attention. One hand on the pencil, one on the bread knife, one on the dread knife. One eye on the list, one on the child. The kitchen table makes such divided tenderness possible. It is broad enough for all the evening's small negotiations. And there is comfort, too, in the look of stored things. Jars on a shelf, a pudding set to cool, bread racked properly, a leftover half onion covered and put away. These small preservations answer the rain with a domestic confidence that feels almost moral. Let it be wet outside. Let the streets shine black. Let the gutters carry water all night. Inside, the pantry is in order. Inside, there is tomorrow's soup. Inside, children will wake to dry clothes and breakfast. Inside, the woman at the table has made sure the family's life extends one more day in decent shape. It is easy from a distance to romanticize this kind of thrift and call it simple or wholesome or old-fashioned in some broad sentimental way. But from inside it, the feeling is more complicated. There is satisfaction, certainly, pride too, yet there is also the fatigue of having every ounce matter, of knowing that a little carelessness can ripple into inconvenience, cost, embarrassment. The burden lies not only in doing the work, but in having to think ahead all the time. Rainy evenings sharpen that awareness, because they fold the family inward and show you, room by room, exactly what must be sustained. At the table, you fold the grocery list once and place it near your handbag or under the sugar bowl, so it will not be forgotten. The wrapped leftovers are put away. The bread box is shut. The crumbs are brushed into your palm. The table is wiped again, though not fully cleared, because the next stage of the night is already arriving. Tomorrow has begun here, in this pool of light, while the rain continues outside. And once more the kitchen table has done its work, taking the remains of one ordinary meal and turning them into the promise that the household will wake organized, fed, and somehow still respectable by morning. There is another reason rainy nights feel more intimate and more exacting than clear ones. The weather closes the world, yes, but it also makes the house more visible to itself. When everybody is in, when the windows reflect the room back like darkened mirrors, when no one is distracted by the yard or the street or twilight on the porch, the home is left alone with its own standards. And in a modest 1950s Canadian house, standards matter. Even on a wet night, perhaps especially then. You may tell yourself there will be no callers in weather like this, and often there are none. Yet the possibility remains in the body like a habit. The parish woman with some notice to deliver, a neighbour returning a dish, a husband's co-worker stopping by with a message, a relative passing through and deciding, because the rain is unpleasant, that now is as good a time as any to knock. So even in private, the house is kept in a kind of poised readiness. Not gleaming always, not magazine perfect, but defensible. The front room is part of this readiness. So is the hall. So is the visible edge of the kitchen. But the kitchen table is where the tension between real life and presentable life becomes most obvious. Because the kitchen table wants to become cluttered the moment you turn away. It attracts school papers, socks, scissors, opened envelopes, sugar bowls, wet mittens, teacups, folded laundry, somebody's marbles, somebody's half-finished drawing, somebody's note to remember tomorrow. A lived-in table acquires evidence quickly, yet you also know that too much evidence looks careless. The difference between busy and slovenly can feel perilously thin, especially if you grew up being taught that a respectable woman never lets the house slide where others can see. So you keep editing the table. You stack the papers. You fold the mending into a basket. You remove the sticky spoons somebody abandoned. You straighten the salt and pepper. You brush away crumbs no one else has noticed. You glance toward the doorway and imagine the room as another woman might see it. Not because you are shallow, and not because the other woman is cruel. Simply because this is how domestic life often works. Homes are read. Women know this. They read one another's rooms the way men may read a car engine or a lawn edge or a pair of work boots. Quietly, instantly. A polished floor. A ring on a table. Dust on a sill. Thin towels. Good curtains. Cheap tea biscuits passed off with confidence. Each detail says something, however unfairly. Rain makes you more aware of this because it heightens the contrast between shelter and neglect. A warm, orderly house in bad weather feels virtuous. A damp, untidy one feels accusatory. You move through the kitchen with this knowledge in your muscles. The dishcloth wrung properly. The chair pushed fully in. The sugar tin closed. The wet garments not left in a heap where anyone might see them and think the household careless. Domestic pride is often spoken of as if it were vanity. But from inside it feels more like defense. The home is one of the few places where many women are judged thoroughly and often. Naturally, they learn to guard it. At the table, you notice a watermark from a cup and rub it at once with the heel of your hand. You notice the children's pencil shavings and gather them. You notice that the tablecloth, if there is one tonight, has shifted and no longer hangs evenly. Small corrections, constant and nearly invisible. This is part of the emotional life of rainy evenings too. Since everyone is indoors, there is less excuse for disorder to go unseen. And disorder embarrasses in two directions. There is the fear of what others might think, but there is also the private shame of feeling yourself not quite equal to the day. If the sink still carries too many dishes, if the floor has not been swept, if a child's wet things remain in a pile, if your own apron is stained, and you suddenly become conscious of it under the overhead light. Rain can sharpen these feelings because it turns the home inward. There is nowhere else for the eye to go. The house must answer for itself. Yet appearances are never only about pride. They are also about kindness. A proper room calms people. A decent table tells children where to sit and how to behave. A hallway that is not too chaotic spares a husband the sense that the whole house is forever on the verge of collapse. A polished kitchen, even if only modestly polished, gives back some feeling of control to the woman who has spent all day answering demands. Respectability is exhausting, yes, but it also creates a form of peace. The tragedy is, the peace must so often be manufactured by the tiredest person in the house. Still, there are pleasures in it. You smooth the oilcloth. You fold the checked tea towel neatly over the oven handle. You set the chairs with a little more care than strictly necessary. The room answers. It always does. A kitchen can be transformed by surprisingly little when the light is right and the weather bad. One wiped surface, one cleared corner, one lamp left on. The rain at the window makes every gesture of order look more generous. You remember, perhaps, the houses of other women, a cousin whose kitchen always smelled of cinnamon and polish, making you feel she somehow moved more gracefully than you. A neighbour whose children seemed never to leave wet things where they did not belong, though perhaps that was illusion. Your mother's table, sternly cleared after every meal. An aunt's cluttered but warm room where nobody apologised for crumbs. These remembered rooms hover around your own while you work. They shape what feels acceptable, what feels sloppy, what feels enviable, what feels merciful. Rainy nights invite comparison because they make each glowing window on the street seem like its own little test. If you stand at the sink and look out past your own reflection, you can just make out the neighbouring houses through the dark wet air. One porch light on, another kitchen still bright. Somewhere a curtain drawn, somewhere a car arriving with headlights sliding over puddles. You know without knowing that in those other houses, women are also wiping counters, calling children, setting out dry clothes, checking clocks, perhaps wondering whether their rooms look properly kept. There is comfort in that shared discipline, even as it tightens around you. The table waits through all of it. It is witness to the standards, not the creator of them. Yet because it sits at the centre of so much household traffic, it becomes the place where the house's moral weather can be read. A clear, ready table says the evening is under control. A burdened, sticky, crowded one says the day has overrun its keeper. On some nights that truth is unfair. On most nights it is unavoidable. So you wipe again. You gather the cup rings. You align the homework pile. You fold the catalogue shut. You move the sewing basket beneath the chair. You restore the table to a form of temporary dignity, knowing full well it will be used again within minutes. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of domestic order on rainy nights. It is not a finished state, but a repeated act of faith. You do not make the room perfect. You make it decent once more. You bring it back into balance. You say, through your hands and not your voice, this house is holding. This evening is holding. We are still the sort of people who keep things in good shape. Outside, rain hisses softly in the dark. Inside, the table gleams a little under the lamp, neither fancy nor spotless, but steady, prepared, and quietly proud. Later in the evening, when the younger children have at last been steered toward bed and the house exhales into a lower volume, the table takes on another role entirely. It becomes the place where money is allowed to exist in the open. Not much money, perhaps. That is part of the point. By day, finances may be spoken of in fragments, if they are spoken of at all. The husband brings home the pay envelope. Bills arrive in the post. Prices are noticed at the butcher, the grocer, the department store, the pharmacy. A child asks for skates or a new sweater, or money for a school outing, and the answer hovers somewhere between "we'll see" and "not this week." But it is often at the kitchen table, after supper and under the kind cover of a rainy night, that the real arithmetic appears. You lay out the envelopes, hydro. Grocer's account, if there is one, coal or oil, depending on the house and region. The doctor, if someone has been ill. Church envelope. A note from school about fees. Perhaps an installment payment on something bought sensibly, but still bought on time. The paper is thin, official, unromantic. It looks oddly flat against the table's familiar surface. Yet it can change the whole mood of the room more quickly than weather. Rain seems to make this ritual more private, perhaps because no one is likely to interrupt. Perhaps because the whole house feels sealed off from the street, leaving only the lamp, the papers, and the low sound of water against the window. You sit with a pencil, maybe with a small household notebook, maybe with figures worked out on the backs of old envelopes. The amounts are not enormous, but they must align. That is the challenge. Not grandeur. Alignment. Rent or mortgage. Food. Fuel. Clothing. School needs. The surprises that are never really surprises, because in family life something is always wearing out, growing out, cracking, leaking, or being required by Monday. You know the prices better than most people realize. You know not only what butter costs, but what kind of week it becomes when butter has risen. You know what meat can be skipped without making the family feel deprived in a way that leads to complaint. You know how soap, stockings, and school notebooks can quietly add up until the month feels thinner than it looked in the pay envelope. You know how often a child may ask for store-bought biscuits before it makes more sense to bake. You know the cost of convenience, which is to say, you know how often convenience must be denied. At the table, money becomes domestic rather than abstract. It sits near the sugar bowl. It rests beside the bread box. It shares space with the mending basket and the school papers. That is important. It means money is not separate from family life, but woven directly into it. A pair of boots is not just a purchase. It is whether a child arrives at school dry. A heavier coat is not just a line in a ledger. It is whether the family can stand on the rink without shivering. A better roast for Sunday is not extravagance alone. It is morale. The table shows you this constantly. Numbers turn into bodies. Meals, appearances, weather, mood. Perhaps your husband sits down too. Some men do this more fully than others. Some take out the bills and treat the table briefly like an office. Some leave the household calculations almost entirely to their wives, but still want a summary. Some bring the pay, and not much more. Yet on a rainy night, there can be a rare softness to these discussions, a sense that the weather has enclosed the family enough that practical talk can happen without feeling stark. A cup of tea, sleeves rolled, pencil tapping, one person saying, "We can manage," in a tone that may mean reassurance or instruction or both. You do not always say what worries you most. That too's part of the mood. The careful omission, the small restraint. Perhaps you do not mention how thin the children's socks are getting, because you do not want another cost added tonight. Perhaps you do not mention the church sale coming up, where people will notice if you wear that same dress again. Perhaps you do not say that the kitchen curtains are more faded than they used to be, or that the linoleum near the stove has begun to curl, or that the boys' school shoes are not likely to last the wet season. You become skilled at ranking needs, then skilled again at ranking which needs deserve words. The table hears what remains unsaid as clearly as what is written. There may be a catalogue open nearby, turned down at a page of blankets, school skirts, men's shirts, practical shoes. You are not dreaming foolishly. You are assessing. The catalogue is both temptation and planning document. Rainy nights are when you can sit under a lamp and measure the family against these printed possibilities. This one is sturdy. This one is handsome, but not necessary. This one would be nice if prices came down, or if Christmas money stretched. The kitchen table allows desire to exist in a disciplined form. You may want, but you want with a pencil in your hand. Outside, the rain continues with the blunt steadiness of nature, uninterested in your calculations. Inside, the calculations continue anyway. That is the dignity of it. The weather may be damp, the month may be long, the children may be wearing through things faster than expected, but still the household is organized at this table. Not lavishly, not painlessly, but with intelligence and quiet endurance. There is something deeply moving in that, though no one in the room would use such language. Sometimes money talk becomes memory talk without warning. A husband remembers winters when the house was colder. You remember a childhood kitchen where new shoes came only after old ones were visibly impossible. Someone mentions how lucky it is, really, that the roof holds and the furnace works and there is meat enough for Sunday. Gratitude arrives, but not the shiny kind. Not a speech, more a practical acknowledgement that things are manageable. Rain can invite this tone. Wet weather makes shelter feel tangible, and tangible shelter makes ordinary security easier to appreciate. Yet security is never complete. The bills still sit there, the numbers still must resolve. The grocery list still needs adjusting. A child will still grow again. A coat will still need replacing. The kitchen table does not eliminate worry, it domesticates it. That may be why it feels such a powerful object in memory. It was not a magical table where all problems vanished. It was the place where problems became countable, discussable, survivable. You place one bill beneath another. You fold the paid receipts. You tuck the cash where it belongs. You close the notebook. For a moment, the table is very still. The rain at the window sounds farther away now, though perhaps it has not changed. The household has become quieter. The chair across from you is empty or nearly so. The lamp makes a clean oval of light on the table's surface, catching old scratches and new paper alike. Here, under that light, so much of family life has been maintained through discipline that rarely announces itself. Warmth costs money. Food costs money. Respectability costs money. Yet so often, it is the woman at the kitchen table who translates money into lived comfort with such competence that the rest of the house barely notices the translation taking place. You gather the papers, but not all the feeling. Some of it remains in your shoulders, some in your jaw, some in the little habit of mentally rechecking figures while rinsing the teacups. Still, there is relief in having looked directly. Rainy nights sometimes make that easier. They permit seriousness without ceremony. Outside is wet, dark, and beyond improvement. Inside, at least, accounts can be faced, and again the table has served as the plain, faithful surface on which an ordinary family's whole financial reality can be spread, measured, worried over, and then folded back into the drawer before morning. If you stand at the kitchen window long enough on a rainy night, the neighborhood begins to feel less like a collection of separate houses and more like a row of private weather lanterns. Each window glows. Each porch light catches the rain a little differently. Each family is sealed inside its own routines, its own standards, its own small dramas and economies. And because you know this, because you live among these homes rather than merely beside them, rain draws comparison into the room with the damp air. You know who keeps a better garden than you, who has the bigger car, which house got aluminum storm windows before the others did, which woman bakes for every church sale and still manages to keep her children's cuffs white, which family just bought a television, which husband travels for work, which widow never seems to have enough coal delivered. These are not gossip in the cheap sense. They are the social weather of the street. They settle over ordinary life quietly, shaping what feels enviable, what feels respectable, what feels precarious. Rain makes these things more vivid because it reveals shelter as a form of status. A warm-lit home in bad weather looks prosperous, even when it is merely well-run. Dry children, bright curtains, a polished porch step, a car that starts easily in wet weather, a husband home on time, a supper smell drifting out briefly when the door opens. All these become tiny public signs. You do not need speeches about class. You can read it in whether the back steps rot, whether the galoshes fit, whether the laundry gets brought in at the right time, whether the curtains hang fresh or tired. At the table, you think about these things without necessarily admitting you are thinking about them. Perhaps a neighbor's casserole dish has recently been returned and you remember, with that sharp domestic eye women develop, how orderly her kitchen looked in the brief moment you stood in it. Not larger than yours maybe, but brighter somehow. Or maybe you noticed a better tablecloth, a new chrome bread box, a floor without that one worn patch. And the noticing does not make you small-hearted. It simply means you inhabit a world where households are one of the primary languages of social life. Other women read yours too. You know this. Of course you know it. Yet the street is not only a map of comparison, it is also a net of consolation. On rainy nights, the kindness of neighborhoods can feel especially real. A child runs home from next door under somebody else's umbrella. A dish is returned with a square of cake on top because the weather seems to call for it. A husband from across the street helps push a stalled car out of the puddled driveway. Someone telephones to say the church social will likely be cancelled if this keeps up. The women on the street know what this kind of weather means. Extra laundry, muddier floors, children underfoot, plans shrinking inward. Even if nobody says so directly, there is a sense of shared conditions. The rain falls on every roof. Still, shared conditions do not erase the delicate pressure to seem equal to them. You may imagine another woman in another kitchen on the same street, wiping her table under a similar lamp, hearing her own kettle, perhaps wondering whether your kitchen looks more orderly than hers. That possibility can soften envy. It can also sharpen the will to keep going. There is companionship in knowing others are doing the same work. There is pressure in knowing they might do it better. The kitchen table is where these social impressions settle into personal feeling. A child mentions that someone else had store-bought biscuits in their lunch. You hear it and say something mild, but the remark remains. A husband says the neighbors are getting their siding redone. You nod, though privately you're thinking of school shoes and hydro. A church notice sits on the table announcing a women's gathering, and immediately your mind jumps to what you might wear, whether the hem is still decent, whether the weather will ruin shoes on the way. The table is where society enters the house in paper form, spoken form, and remembered form. It is where public life becomes domestic pressure. And then there are the windows themselves. Rain on the windows blurs the outside enough to make neighbors seem almost storybook, but not enough to erase them. One bright rectangle across the street tells you someone is still up with dishes. Another, half-curtained, suggests a front room where company may be visiting in spite of the weather. A porch light going out says the family has gone to bed, or at least put itself beyond callers. Sometimes you catch the sight of a woman moving past her own kitchen window carrying a bowl or towel, and for a second your lives mirror one another so exactly it is almost startling. Two women in two lit rectangles, each making the evening hold. This can be lonely. It can also be deeply reassuring. Because ordinary labor becomes easier to bear when you feel it is happening all around you, not just to you. The neighborhood, on rainy nights, becomes a hidden chorus of supper dishes, drying socks, quiet accounts, and children being called in sharper tones than anyone intended. Houses keep their own secrets, but the weather reminds them they are not the only ones keeping them. Perhaps you remember streets from your own childhood. Houses with steamy windows in November rain, the smell when you entered some other family's kitchen, noticing at once whether they had cocoa, whether they had better linoleum, whether their table seemed wider or their chairs more polished. Children always notice these things, even when they cannot interpret them. Later, as women, they carry those impressions into their own housekeeping. Rainy nights awaken such memories because wet weather sharpens the sense of crossing from outside into someone else's maintained warmth. At your own table, you look around and take stock. The room is not perfect. It never is. There is a plate still on the drainer. There are damp rubbers by the back door. The school papers should be put away properly. The curtains need washing soon, yet the kettle is hot, the children are dry, the lamp is kind, and the table is once again mostly clear. That counts. On a street of ordinary families, it counts a great deal. Many lives are held together by just such adequacy earned nightly. A car passes outside, tires whispering through wet road. Headlights slide over the kitchen ceiling for a brief second and are gone. Somewhere, a dog barks once and stops. The rain has gentled, but only a little. The neighborhood remains turned inward. Everyone in their own pool of yellow light, everyone, you suspect, measuring themselves against weather and one another in ways too small to sound dramatic and too human to be dismissed. The table holds a church circular, a grocery list, and a half-finished cup of tea. These three things together tell you almost everything about the social world of the house. Obligation, sustenance, pause. Community, economy, and a few minutes snatched for yourself. The table is never just personal. It is where the outside world arrives in envelopes, invitations, expectations, and comparisons, and where you decide what can be managed with grace. There is tenderness in that labor too. The effort to keep the family from feeling lesser, the effort to make the house not merely dry but decent, the effort to send children out each morning not obviously lacking, the effort to welcome neighbors without apology. These are not vain efforts. They are woven into the dignity of ordinary life. Rainy nights make them especially visible because bad weather exposes the quality of shelter, and shelter is one of the plainest measures by which families understand their place in the world. You look once more at the street beyond the glass. Other kitchens blow. Other women move. Other tables are being cleared, then used again, and under the rain, an entire neighborhood of ordinary Canadian households continues its quiet evening work, each table bearing its own small load of money, manners, fatigue, pride, and care. By this point in the evening, the house has begun to mistake your continued movement for permanence. That is one of the subtle cruelties of domestic labor. The longer you keep going, the more natural it seems that you should keep going. Rainy nights do not change that. If anything, they can deepen it. Because the comfort weather brings to everyone else is built directly out of the work still running through your hands. You feel it in your body now, not as a dramatic collapse, not as a scene, more as the accumulation of small physical truths. The skin at the base of your thumb feels rough from washing and wringing. Your shoulders carry a soft ache from reaching, lifting, drying, bending. The backs of your legs are tired in a way that becomes most noticeable only when you sit. Your feet, sensible shoes on linoleum all day, know each square of the floor too well. There is a warmth in the kitchen, yes, but your hands may still feel slightly cold where the dishwater ended and the damp things from the hall began. No one would likely ask if you are tired in a way that expects a full answer. That is not because the family is unkind. It is because your labor belongs to the category of things assumed. The meal appears, the table is cleared, the wet things become dry, the children go to bed with what they need. The grocery list forms itself. The missing button returns. The room remains calm enough that everyone may absorb its calm as though it were part of the architecture. This is the paradox of the housewife's rainy evening. The better the work is done, the more invisible its effort becomes, and yet your body knows. You sit at the kitchen table with one hand around a cup gone from hot to merely warm. You look down at your own fingers, a small cut from a tin lid, a crescent mark where thread pulled against skin. Nails practical rather than ornamental. Maybe one chipped from scrubbing. Maybe traces of flour still caught at the side despite washing. These hands have been in nearly every part of the family's comfort today. Breakfast, lunches, beds, damp collars, market bags, potato peels, school notes, tea towels, wet hair, soup spoons, furnace settings, and now this quiet late-hour cup. The rain outside makes the room look gentle, but your hands tell the truer story of what gentleness costs. The table receives that truth. You lay both forearms on it for a moment, not dramatically, only because their weight needs setting down somewhere. The table is cool and firm beneath your skin. In this way it becomes almost a companion object, one of the few things in the room sturdy enough to absorb your pause without asking anything of you. Chairs demand that you rise again. Cups must be washed. Children must be tucked. But the table can simply hold you for a minute. That matters more than it sounds. Some of the fatigue is not physical at all. It is the fatigue of continual noticing, the mental sorting, the remembering, the running list that never fully leaves. Tomorrow's lunch. The neighbour's dish to return. The sweater cuff. The permission slip. Whether there is enough tea. Whether the rain will become colder by morning. Whether the youngest is coming down with something. Whether the older one is suddenly too silent. Whether your husband's work trousers are where they ought to be. Whether the church envelope was put by the handbag or will be forgotten and found too late. This kind of tiredness rarely shows itself in the same honourable way as heavy lifting or outdoor labour. It looks like sitting still. It sounds like a sigh. Yet it is relentless. Rain can intensify it because everyone stays close enough to need tending. There are more interruptions on wet evenings, more requests folded into the same room, more little disputes to settle because no one has had enough air, more dampness to monitor, more clutter arriving all at once, more proof that the house is a living machine whose smoothness depends on someone attending every small shudder and snag. The weather outside may be soothing, but the weather inside your mind can remain busy long after the children have quieted. And still, there is a kind of pride beneath the fatigue. Not boastful pride, not the kind that wants applause. More the grounded satisfaction of competence. You know that the evening would feel different without your management. Harder at the edges. Colder in mood. Less punctual. Less dry. Less fed. Less fed. The family may not frame it that way, but deep down, perhaps in the same place where weariness sits, there is a recognition that you have once again brought a complicated little world safely through another ordinary night. This is why sentimental pictures of domestic life never quite capture the truth. The kitchen is warm, yes. The rain on the glass is lovely, yes. The rain on the glass is lovely, yes. The lamplight on the table can look almost holy in a certain hour, but the beauty of such scenes rests on labour that has texture, strain, repetition, and often loneliness in it. To see only the glow and not the effort is to misunderstand the room. Rainy nights in the 1950s felt warmer not because life was simpler, but because the contrast between weather and shelter made all the hidden work of shelter shine more clearly. Sometimes you allow yourself a small rebellion, though it hardly looks like one. You leave one cup for morning. You decide the floor may wait. You fold the dishcloth, but do not wring it perfectly. You sit 2 minutes longer than necessary. You eat the heel of the bread with butter standing at the table rather than making a proper plate. Such acts are tiny, almost absurdly tiny, yet within a life organized around the needs of others, they can carry surprising weight. Rain gives cover to them. The weather says stay in, slow down, let the night close around you. For a moment, you listen. Then, because life is what it is, someone calls from upstairs. You rise. There it is again, the immediate translation of your own paused body back into usefulness. A blanket tucked, a cough listened to, a forgotten glass of water brought, a window checked. Because the rain sounds too near, you move through the dim house, then return to the kitchen table afterward, where your tea is cooler and the lamp seems brighter for the darkness beyond the doorway. The table is still there, patient, familiar, slightly worn at the edge where your hip has brushed it 1,000 times. It is the surface on which fatigue becomes visible in the little signs no one photographs. A hand laid flat, a second too long a cup left unfinished, the sewing basket not quite put away, the envelope turned over because you cannot bear figures for another minute. The ordinary honesty of these details is what makes the room so alive. Outside, the rain is beginning to lessen, though the drip from the eaves may continue half the night. Inside, the house is quieter now. Quieter, but not empty of need. It never is. Still, the worst of the evening rush has passed. The warmth remains. The children sleep, or nearly do. The man of the house has settled. The dishes are done enough, and you, though tired through to the bone in ways no one will fully describe, remain the one who has shaped this piece. That is worth noticing, even if only here in the hush of the narrative, because so often it went unnoticed in the room itself. The kitchen table knows, though. It has held your elbows, your lists, your mending, your bills, your cup, your fatigue, and tonight, as the rain thins against the windows, it holds the unspoken fact that the comfort of the house has been made, once again, by someone too busy making it to seem comfortable herself. Rain does something peculiar to memory. It does not always call back the grand events people later put in family stories. More often it brings back rooms, surfaces, smells, the angle of lamplight on a table, the feel of a damp cuff turned toward a stove, the sound of a mother moving in a kitchen after supper. On nights like this, in a Canadian house in the 1950s, the present can become thin enough for older kitchens to show through. You sit at the table and suddenly remember another one. Not because you meant to, perhaps because the rain on the window has the same patient tapping at hand when you were a girl. Perhaps because you have just folded a tea towel the way your mother did. Perhaps because the smell of wet wool from the hallway has opened some forgotten drawer in the mind. Memory often enters not through thought, but through repetition. You are doing what she did, and the weather is what she knew, and without any great announcement the earlier room is there. Your childhood kitchen may have been simpler, colder, stricter, or it may have felt warmer than this one, because childhood has a way of remembering warmth more easily than worry. Maybe there was a wood stove instead of something newer. Maybe the linoleum pattern was different, the table heavier, the tea stronger, the windows draftier. Maybe your mother wore an apron with pockets full of pins and handkerchiefs and bits of folded paper. Maybe she too sat late at the table with socks and lists and a face that looked calm to you then, though you now understand how much effort that calm required. Rain helps you understand your mother differently. As a child, you may have thought rainy evenings were simply cozy. The windows steamed, supper smelled good, boots dried by the door, the radio murmured. The room felt enclosed and safe. Only now, sitting in your own kitchen after your own day of labour, do you feel the hidden structure under that coziness. Someone kept watch over every detail. Someone translated weather into shelter. Someone made sure the floor was not dangerously wet, the mittens were not lost, the tea was strong enough, the lunch could still be packed in the morning. The room looked respectable if anyone came. Memory matures when labour becomes personal. The table you sit at now is not your mother's, and yet it carries her in gestures. You wipe in the same circles. You save string the same way. You say, "Don't leave that there, it'll be in the way," in almost the same rhythm. You know how to stretch leftovers because someone stretched them before you. You know how to dry out the cuffs of a coat, how to set bread properly, how to judge whether the rain means the children will need heavier things tomorrow. Domestic knowledge travels quietly across generations, hidden in the body more than in speech. Rainy nights reveal these inheritances with particular gentleness because the tasks are repetitive and the mind is softened by sound. Perhaps you remember not only your mother but other women too. An aunt whose kitchen smelled of starch and mint. A grandmother whose rainy evenings were darker because electricity was used sparingly. A neighbor who always had a pan of something sweet, making your own home seem suddenly plain. A farm kitchen where mud and rain entered on a larger scale and the table had to absorb even more of life. These rooms remain inside you. They accompany your choices even when you do not call them up by name. Why you think one kind of clutter means carelessness and another means comfort. Why certain weather makes you immediately want to put on a kettle. Why you cannot bear wet things left in a pile. Why a table partly cleared can still feel not right. Memory lives in standards as much as in tenderness. And there are gentler inheritances too. A way of laying a hand on a child's shoulder while correcting homework. A way of putting jam on toast for someone not because they asked, but because the weather has made them droop. A way of leaving the kitchen lamp on longer than necessary, so the house feels watched over. Rainy nights often make love look like this. Practical, indirect, almost hidden inside routine. You may remember being the child who benefited from such gestures without noticing them. Now you are the one performing them, and the room feels full of women not present, and yet somehow still instructing. The kitchen table becomes a bridge across time. At one end, your own children with their damp school papers, modern enough in their moment to think the house has always functioned this way. At the other end, the women before you, who also cleared and counted and mended while rain moved over Canadian roofs. Different towns, different street names, different wall colours, but the same emotional arrangement. The world wet outside, the family gathered in, the table lit, the woman still working after the meal. This can feel comforting. It can also feel heavy, because inheritance is not only warmth passed down, it is expectation passed down. The idea that a good woman keeps going, that a proper home answers weather with readiness, that visible strain should be minimized, that domestic skill is a duty before it is a talent. You may carry some of these beliefs with pride and some with fatigue, but carry them you do. Rain can make that clearer. In the quiet after supper, hearing the same weather your mother heard, you feel the line of women behind the evening. Yet memory is merciful in some ways. It does not preserve, only burden. It preserves texture, the exact glow of a lamp over a checkered cloth, the smell of tea leaves in a warm bin, the sound of someone scraping boots on the back step, the squeak of a chair on worn kitchen flooring, the odd happiness of hearing rain and knowing you need not go out again. When such details return, they soften the room. They remind you that domestic life is not only obligation, it is also the making of sensory worlds so stable that people carry them for decades without realizing. You glance at your children's things on the table and wonder what they will remember. The shape of the sugar bowl, the sound of your chair, the pattern of drops sliding down the window above the sink. Your voice saying to move that paper before it gets wet. The way toast tastes on rainy evenings. The steam when you pour tea. Perhaps they will remember none of the strain and all of the warmth. Or perhaps years later, they will remember both. That would be truer. That would be kinder to the women who made the warmth possible. Outside, the rain seems older than the decade. It could be 1937, or 1954, or 1962. Rain abolishes some of time's surface markers. Inside, though, the details place you firmly here. The catalogue on the table, the lunch pail by the wall, the sensible chrome, the practical cupboards, the smell of furnace heat. This specific Canadian present is real and solid, yet memory moves through it like another current, linking your kitchen to kitchens before it and, though you do not know it, to kitchens after. You rise to check the stove, and then return to the table as if pulled by habit stronger than intention. There is comfort in the repetition itself. Rain, table, lamp, cup, list, folded cloth. It is almost liturgical, though no one would use such a grand word for it. The sacredness, if it exists, lies in the repetition of care under ordinary conditions. The rain keeps speaking at the window, and through that sound you can feel how one woman's evening work is never entirely her own. It is borrowed, adapted, passed on. Her mother in her wrists, her grandmother in her thrift, her own quiet tenderness waiting in the habits her children will someday remember as simply what home felt like. There comes a point on some rainy evenings when the kitchen finally begins to belong to you. Not completely, not for long, but enough to be felt. The children are in bed or near enough. The hallway has gone still. The radio in the other room has dropped to a lower murmur or been switched off entirely. The newspaper lies folded or abandoned. The practical urgency that drove the earlier part of the evening has loosened. The dishes have reached their final arrangement on the rack or in the cupboard. The wet things are drying as well as they can. The list is made. The bills are put away. And there you are, back at the kitchen table, in a kind of rare late-hour solitude. This is one of the deepest comforts rainy nights offer. The weather excuses stillness. Because it is wet and dark outside, no one expects more of the evening. No one ought to be asking you to go out, or fetch something, or call on anyone, or dress the family into social form. The world beyond the windows feels closed for the night. That closure can at last become a gift, not merely confinement. Privacy. You sit with your cup and the table seems larger than it did earlier. As if all the cleared tasks have given it back some open space. There may still be a folded tea towel, a sewing basket tucked near one leg, the church circular beneath the sugar bowl, but the room has passed from busyness into remainder, and remainder can feel almost luxurious when a woman's day has been full of interruptions. The lamplight is kind now. Earlier it had the obligation of visibility. It was for wiping, sorting, reading labels, finding buttons, checking sums. Now it creates atmosphere. The shade, if there is a table lamp or a lower lamp left on, warms the room into amber. Even the overhead bulb, if it is all you have, feels softer because the rest of the house is dark. Rain on the windows becomes less a nuisance and more a companion sound. The kettle may go on one final time, not because anyone needs it, but because you do. This is a kind of possession. Not of ownership in the legal sense, not even of authority perhaps, though there is some of that too. More the possession of time and room by presence. You are alone with the kitchen, and for a few minutes the room reveals itself not only as a workplace, but as a shelter for you personally. That does not happen enough for many women. So much of the house belongs to them in responsibility, and so little in rest. Yet on rainy nights, especially late, the balance can tilt just enough to be noticed. You listen to the rain and allow yourself not to move. This is harder than it sounds. The habit of scanning the room for the next task remains strong. A crumb near the bread box. A cup not yet rinsed. Tomorrow's clothes not laid out. But if the night is kind, and fatigue has made you a little brave, you may let some of it remain. You may understand in your bones that a house can survive until morning with one unfinished corner. The discovery feels almost illicit. Rain outside says the world itself is unfinished tonight. Why should the kitchen be any different? Your thoughts grow quieter too, though not empty. Perhaps they drift toward small hopes that do not feel foolish in this room. New curtains by Christmas. Better weather for the wash next week. The boy settling at school. The girl outgrowing that recent sullenness. Enough put by for something modest but improving. Nothing grand. Rainy night hopes are rarely grand. They are measured in comfort, reputation, health, and the continued holding together of family life. Yet because the house is so still, these hopes can feel tender rather than burdensome. The kitchen table has a different meaning at such an hour. Earlier it held labour, arithmetic, mending, and the spill of family need. Now it holds your pause, your chin perhaps resting on your hand. your fingers tracing an old scratch in the wood or oilcloth without looking, your cup warming one spot near the edge. The table becomes intimate, not because anything dramatic happens there, but because nothing much happens for a minute, except your being in the room you have spent the day sustaining. There is a sadness in this too, if one is honest. A woman may feel most alone only after everyone else is comfortably settled. The quiet that brings relief can also bring the awareness that much of her life is given in fragments. A conversation interrupted, a cup cooled before it is finished. A thought postponed. Rainy nights can sharpen that feeling because they make the house feel like a sealed world, and within that world your role is so continuous it can be difficult to locate the self apart from it. The late kitchen, then, becomes not just a refuge but a mirror. Who are you when no one is calling from the other room? Who are you when the dishes are done and the lists made and the table at last sits mostly clear? The answers may come only in sensations. You are the woman whose shoulders finally drop an inch, the woman who likes the sound of rain more than she admits, the woman who, if left alone long enough, might open the catalogue not to price children's things, but to imagine a dress with a better collar, or a lamp with a shade less tired, or curtains with a pattern just lively enough to freshen the room. Desire, after serving everyone else for hours, returns timidly to its owner. You may not buy any of it. That is not the point. The point is that rainy solitude allows wanting to resurface, however modestly. The room around you seems to know this. The stove is cooling. The dish rack shines faintly. The window is black except where rain catches porch light. Somewhere the house creaks as it settles. A child coughs once upstairs and then is quiet. The table remains under your forearms, companionable and plain, neither demanding nor praising. In its silence, there is a rare form of acknowledgement. It has borne the evening with you. Now it bears the residue of your private self. If you were to speak, no one might hear. But the room feels almost like it would listen. That is part of why such moments remain in memory so powerfully. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were among the few times a woman could feel both necessary and separate from necessity. Rain made the home warmer, yes, but sometimes it also made the home quieter, in just the right way for a tired person to hear herself again. At last you stand, rinse the cup, leave the cloth folded over the sink, perhaps switch off one lamp and leave another burning low. The kitchen will belong to morning soon enough. Breakfast, lunches, damp weather again perhaps, school shoes, porridge, rushed voices, and all the practical machinery beginning anew. But for these final minutes of the rainy night, the table, the lamp, and the sound at the window have belonged gently to you. And that small possession, though modest and fleeting, can feel like a kind of grace. Love in houses like this is often expressed sideways, not in speeches, not in dramatic embraces around the kitchen table while rain trembles at the windows, more in the shape of provisions, in whether the socks are dry by morning, in whether the child who came home damp finds a warm mug set near the edge of the table without having asked, in whether the husband's work shirt is turned right side out, brushed and ready, in whether someone remembers which slice of bread he prefers for toast, in the lamp left on a little longer than necessary because the sun is not yet home and the weather is unpleasant. Rainy nights reveal this kind of love particularly well, because the house closes around practical acts and lets them blow. You may not think of yourself as performing tenderness when you cut a second piece of cake smaller because the first was clearly wanted but not politely asked for. You may not name it tenderness when you turn a chair toward the register. So a child can warm chilled feet while homework is finished. You may not call it love when you tuck a still damp mitten into a better drying place, so a morning fuss does not become a morning misery. Yet what else is it? Love in domestic life often arrives wearing the apron of usefulness. The kitchen table is the chief stage for this quiet language. Here a child sits while you trim loose threads from a sleeve. Here someone learns multiplication while eating toast. Here, medicine is taken with jam to soften the taste. Here, cocoa appears on particularly wet evenings. Here, apples are peeled and pushed toward a plate in silent answer to a mood. Here, a husband sits late with a sandwich wrapped for a shift that starts before dawn. Here, cards are signed, lunch is packed, collars inspected, worries softened by being given tea and a chair. Ray makes these gestures feel more intimate because every act of comfort stands out against what the weather would otherwise impose. Wet shoes against dry floor, cold hands against hot mug, dark street against lit window. The contrast dignifies care. A person who comes in from rain does not merely enter a house. He enters someone's sustained effort. That effort has emotional meanings that are easy to miss. If you grew up in such a house, you may remember feeling cared for without being able to identify the mechanics. The room was simply warm. The soup was simply ready. The table was simply ready. The table was simply there. Only later do you understand that 100 choices made that steadiness possible. Buying the extra loaf, remembering the school form, saving the string washing, the thermos, drying the mittens near, but not too near the stove. Keeping enough cocoa on hand, preserving a little order, so that comfort had somewhere to land. Love, then, is not only affection. It is attention organized over time. And sometimes, attention is the most exhausting gift. You remember the child who tends to cough in damp weather, so the scarf is found and laid out. You remember the husband who dislikes seeing clutter when he is tired, even if he does not say it directly, so the table is cleared before he sits down for tea. You remember that one daughter is becoming shy about school lunches and does not want the same old sandwich too many days in a row, so the leftovers are reimagined with care. Love in such homes can be full of accommodation, some of it generous, some of it wearying, much of it both at once. Rain magnifies how bodily all this is. Wet hair dried briskly with a towel at the table. A wool sleeve rolled between your fingers to see if it is dry enough. The child leaned half against you while you untangle shoelaces. A warm bowl pushed toward someone whose face has gone pale from cold. The ordinary body is always at the center of household tenderness. Weather only makes this clearer. To be cared for is to be dried, fed, warmed, mended, soothed. And yet, because these acts are so practical, they can pass unnoticed as emotion. That is why memory so often preserves the objects, the mug, the towel, the table lamp, the bread box, the checked cloth, the pair of mittens laid out properly. Objects hold the trace of feeling when words were never used. A person may forget whether anyone ever said, "I love you," in the kitchen, but they will remember the exact sound of butter being spread on toast when they came in from rain, or the way their mother set a chair close to the stove, or how the table always had room made on it somehow, no matter how crowded the day had been. Perhaps on this rainy evening, one of the children comes downstairs again after being sent up. An excuse, perhaps, a bad dream, a forgotten spelling book, a stomach not quite settled. You know the difference between a real need and a need for nearness. Often you answer both in the same tone. Not indulgent, not harsh, practical. Come here then. Sit a moment. Here, drink this. Where is your sweater? Did you wash your hands? The language stays ordinary, but the child hears the deeper message. There is still a place at the table, even late, even after fuss, even after bedtime. That constancy is one of the great emotional gifts of a well-kept kitchen. For the husband too, though perhaps differently. The table can offer a version of care he would never request in sentimental terms. A lunch pail checked. A collar button replaced. A late slice of pie. The weather discussed briefly, so he knows the heavier coat ought to be taken in the morning. Maybe very little is said beyond. It's still coming down, yet the table translates weather into readiness for him as surely as it does for the children. That too is part of the housewife's sidewise love. She anticipates discomfort and tries to remove it before it becomes complaint. There is dignity in this form of care, but also a cost. Because it is easy for a woman to become so fluent in the needs of others that her own pass almost wordless. She knows who likes what, who worries when, who chills easily, who must be coaxed, who must be left alone. But who at the table knows her weather quite as intimately? Rainy nights sometimes sharpen that asymmetry. She is the shelter maker, more than the sheltered. Still, even this truth does not erase the tenderness of what she gives. It only makes it more poignant. You look around the kitchen and see that nearly every object has been enlisted into care. Towels, cups, jars, bowls, lamps, chairs, paper, thread, tea, toast, the warming oven, the drying rack, the sugar tin, the grocery list itself. The home's love language is a language of arrangement, and the table is its grammar. Outside, the rain continues in a softer register now, almost like breathing through sleep. Inside, the kitchen holds the remains of another evening's care: the folded lunchcloth, the washed cup, the mended cuff, the cocoa ring wiped away, the chair pushed back in, ready for the next need. No audience has applauded. No declaration has been made. Yet the room is full of evidence that ordinary people have been loved here in the most sustaining way available to them, through steady, practical attention that makes bad weather easier to bear. By now, if you look at the kitchen table closely enough, you can see that it has held far more than supper. It has held the household's whole emotional weather. The table has carried voices sharp from fatigue and then softened by tea. It has carried school papers that made one child proud and another child ashamed. It has carried church notices, grocery lists, catalogues, unpaid bills, birthday cards, sugar bowls, mending, medicine, toast crumbs, and the pallid light of a lamp over all of it. On rainy nights especially, when the house turns inward and every need seems to arrive at once, the table becomes the plain wooden proof that ordinary family life is never as simple as it looks from outside. You stand beside it now and think of all the different hands that have rested here just in one evening. A child's damp palms fastening homework, another child tracing circles in a ring of water while waiting to be scolded, your own hands, red from dishwater, spreading mending and then moving aside the thread for cups. Your husband's hand turning the newspaper page, reaching for the sugar, touching the bill envelope and then pushing it back. Perhaps an older relative visiting on another rainy night years ago, laying down gloves and commenting on the weather. The table absorbs these lives and yet remains impersonal enough to serve them all. That is part of its quiet greatness. It belongs to no single feeling, which is why it can contain so many. You begin to understand why people remember tables so vividly, long after they forget wallpaper, calendars, or floor patterns. A table is where family life becomes physical. Not abstract love, not abstract duty, not abstract class, but elbows and cups and paper and crumbs and small silences. A child punished at the table remembers the grain or the oilcloth pattern. A woman worrying over money remembers where the lamp cast its circle. A father late from work remembers the plate waiting under a cover. Rain strengthens these memories because it makes the room feel sealed and complete, heightening every gesture inside it. The table is also where pride and embarrassment meet. A report card opened there, a note from a teacher, a neighbour's borrowed dish returned cleaner than necessary, a sweater sleeve quietly turned to hide its wear, a grocery list adjusted after an unwelcome price increase, a church circular reminding you of some social obligation you cannot quite afford in either money or energy. The table is where the family's public face is prepared and repaired. Clothes are checked, lunches are packed, invitations considered, hair cut straight across by practical mothers or older sisters with careful scissors. Even the simplest meal laid neatly becomes part of the household's self-respect. And all of this has been happening under the sound of rain. That matters, because rain has wrapped the house in a kind of emotional insulation, making each small act feel more concentrated. On a dry night, family life may disperse into yard, porch, street, and errands. But under rain, everything returns to the table. Comfort, irritation, comparison, longing, duty, memory, money, care. The room grows full of meanings without anyone naming them. If you let yourself feel it, the table can seem almost like a map of the whole life you are living. Here is the corner where bills lay and where worry sat. Here is the space where bread was sliced, where feeding the family felt practical and endless, and somehow meaningful. Here is the spot where the child's exercise book dried, where the future entered as homework and expectation. Here is the chair where you finally sat late at night, and for a minute, had the room to yourself. Here is the worn edge where your body has moved past thousands of times, proving how completely this ordinary object has been woven into your physical life. No one buys such a table imagining all it will one day know. It is bought because it fits the room, because the price is manageable, because the old one is beyond repair, because a family must have somewhere to eat. Yet over the years it becomes not merely furniture, but a witness. It sees the family at its hungriest, funniest, meanest, proudest, sickest, most tired, most relieved. It hears the weather discussed. It feels the slap of wet mittens, the press of ironed shirts, the dull weight of account books, the bounce of children who have been told 3 times to sit properly. Rainy nights reveal that witness most clearly, because the house becomes small enough for the whole family story to gather in one room. You might think, standing there, that the table has asked too much of you, and in one sense it has. It has been the site of constant labour, constant readiness, constant interpretation of everybody else's needs. It has been your desk, your counter, your sewing station, your schoolroom, your budgeting surface, your late-night rest. It has rarely been empty, rarely ornamental, rarely yours alone, and yet you love it. Maybe not sentimentally, perhaps not even consciously most of the time, but you trust it. You know how it sounds when a chair drags wrong. You know which leg is slightly uneven. You know where the finish has dulled. You know exactly how much room there is for 4 placemats or a roasting pan or a stack of folded laundry. Such knowledge becomes affection, whether acknowledged or not. The table has partnered with your life too faithfully for you not to feel something like gratitude toward it. Rain keeps falling outside in a much softer whisper now, as if the whole night is nearing its quieter end. The house has gone still enough that the refrigerator hum or the settling furnace becomes audible. In this hush, the kitchen table seems even more central, as though the rest of the house radiates outward from it. And perhaps, in emotional terms, it does. Because what is family life after all, if not the repeated return to a shared surface where needs are met imperfectly, but persistently? Meals may not be elaborate. Tempers may fray. Money may pinch. The floor may need sweeping again by morning. The children may grow up and leave. The table itself may one day be replaced. Yet for these years, in this rain-soaked decade, in this Canadian house with its damp rubbers by the door, and its kettle often on and its lamp throwing warm light against black windows, the table has been the place where ordinary people have turned weather worry and work into continuity. That is no small thing. And perhaps that is why rainy nights felt so different then, not because people were simpler or nobler, or somehow more naturally cozy, but because weather revealed how much ordinary comfort depended on repeated acts of attention performed in one room, around one table, by people whose quiet labour made home feel warmer than the night outside. At the end of the evening, there is almost nothing left to do except let the house rest inside its own warmth. This may be the gentlest part of the night. The rain has softened to a patient dripping from eaves and branches. The street outside is dark and shining, but no longer lively. The last car has gone by. The porch light catches only mist now. Upstairs, the children are finally beyond calling distance, held by sleep, or at least by the silence before sleep. In another room, the day's newspaper sits folded with finality, or the last cup has been set down, or the radio has clicked off, leaving the home inside that old deep quiet that seems to belong especially to wet weather. You return to the kitchen table one last time, not because it needs you urgently, only because the evening has taught your body to come back here before surrendering fully to rest. The table stands in the low light, looking almost tender in its plainness. Mostly cleared, a few marks remaining. A sugar bowl. Perhaps one towel not put away. A plate drying on the rack. The room is no longer busy, yet it still bears the shape of the life that has passed through it. That shape is what makes it beautiful. You sit. The chair receives you more kindly now that you are no longer rising every few minutes. Your hands fold loosely around themselves, or around the last of the tea. The window is black enough to reflect the kitchen back to you, cupboards, lamp, chair, your own face softened by evening and work. Rain on the glass turns reflection and outside world into a single dark shimmer. It is difficult, in such a moment, to tell where the house ends and the weather begins. That is part of the charm of rainy nights. The home feels warmer not only because it is warm, but because outside presses so gently against it, making every interior kindness feel earned. This is when the burdens of the evening and its comforts can finally be held together without argument. Yes, the work was real. The dishes, the mending, the lists, the drying, the budgeting, the watching over everyone's needs before your own. Yes, there were moments of irritation, loneliness, worry, comparison, fatigue. There were things postponed and things silently swallowed. The room demanded much from you. The family did too. No honest remembrance of ordinary domestic life should smooth those truths away. And yet, there was also the lamp over the table, the cup warming your hands, the child leaning in close for no reason but trust, the food saved for tomorrow, the wet things made dry, the home made decent again, the rain turning the windows into dark silk, the chair that finally held you, the knowledge, unspoken but solid, that a modest house had once again become shelter in the fullest sense of the word. That is the tenderness of such nights. Not perfection, not fantasy. Shelter. A great deal of human love has been hidden inside that plain word, shelter. To keep off weather. To make a room where people may soften. To turn outside discomfort into inside relief. To let children sleep without feeling the rain as threat. To let a husband lay down the day. To let one tired woman eventually sit inside the order she has built and feel for a minute that it is holding. The kitchen table remains the final proof of this, because it is still there, still solid, still carrying traces of every stage of the evening. It is where the family gathered, where the family was managed, where tomorrow was prepared, where money was faced, where care was given, where memory returned, where solitude briefly arrived. It is plain enough to disappear during busy hours and faithful enough to become unforgettable afterward. A person may move away, grow old, live in different houses with different furniture, and still remember the exact feeling of such a table under the wrists on a rainy night. You can imagine, perhaps many years later, a grown child hearing rain on a modern window and suddenly feeling a kitchen from decades ago rise whole in the mind, not because they remember every detail correctly, but because they remember what the room did to them, how it made the world seem held, how a wet night outside sharpened the kindness of indoor light, how the table always had room somehow, even when it looked full, how there was nearly always tea, or toast, or a towel, or a hand, or simply the confidence that someone had thought ahead. This is the hidden dignity of ordinary women's labor. It survives not only in clean cupboards or balanced household accounts, but in the emotional architecture left inside other people. People remember being warmed. They remember being dried off, fed, found, made ready for bed, sent out in the morning with what they needed. Often they do not fully understand how that warmth was constructed until much later. Rainy nights help us see it, because they reveal the home as a deliberate answer to weather and need. You look once around the kitchen, the linoleum, the stove, the checked cloth, the modest cupboard doors, the dish rack, the coat hooks in the dark hall beyond, the table at the center, bearing no ornament grander than usefulness. All of it seems very small and very complete. Not rich, not effortless, not untouched by worry, but complete enough for this night. Outside, rain still slips from the roof in a thin silver line. Somewhere beyond the street lamps and hedges and darkened porches, the wider world continues with all its demands. But not here, not now. Here there is only the last warmth of the kitchen, the slight hum of the sleeping house, and the feeling that ordinary life, so often dismissed because it is repetitive, has in fact been where some of the deepest human meanings lived all along. You stand at last and touch the table lightly, perhaps without realizing you are doing it. A familiar gesture, a closing gesture, then you switch off the light, or leave one low lamp burning for just a little longer, and the kitchen slips into darkness with the shape of the table still known in your body. The rain goes on, but more gently now. The house settles around the people inside it. The night becomes deep and forgiving. And somewhere in that quiet, the truth remains that a rainy night in a 1950s Canadian home could feel warmer, not only because of the stove or the tea or the close-drawn curtains, but because one ordinary woman in one ordinary kitchen at one ordinary table had spent the evening turning weather into comfort and duty into something very close to love.